Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am your host, Steve Ward. On the High Strangeness Factor, we explore all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained, from the past to the present, and seek out the underlying patterns and connections that exist there. And as you can see, my intros are getting shorter, ladies and gentlemen, which is a good thing. And let me introduce our guest right away. Morgan Knudsen has been involved in the world of the paranormal for 20 years. Her story began with a great-great-grandfather who was the president and founder of the Canadian Association of Psychical Research, Dr. Albert Durant Watson, in 1918. Morgan is the award-winning founder of Entityseeker Paranormal Research. She has been seen on various television shows internationally, such as Discovery Channel, Destination America, and has been featured on Haunted Hospitals and Paranormal 911. Morgan is also guest professor at NorQuest College. She is an instructor for her program, Teaching the Living, which is also a book by the same name. The book deals with the addictions and counseling and social work courses. Actually, that's what her course deals with. Morgan is a firebender at Snake and Pyre, and she studied parapsychology at Parapsychology Foundation Incorporated. Since 1951, they have supported scientific and academic research into psychic phenomena and provide professional resources and information to the academic and lay communities. Morgan, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor.
Oh, it is good to be here, Steve. Thank you for asking me.
You know, I think we might do to start is it might be fun to tell people how we actually connected on Facebook, because we were both mutually, good-naturedly ripping on a mutual friend, namely Chad Lewis. And if anybody needs some ripping on once in a while, it is definitely Chad Lewis.
Yeah, he's fun to bug, you know. He's fun to bug, and I mean, hopefully, well, he'll probably listen to this too. So, you know.
Well, he might. I don't know. He's kind of big now with all his books and so forth. So this might be small change. But when did you first meet or discover Chad Lewis? Just out of curiosity.
Well, it's funny because I've always been a huge fan of his. He's brilliant, and his books, his work with folklore and cryptozoology and sort of the folklore of just native creatures and whatnot that I've investigated myself. I've always been a huge fan of what he's done, and you know, so we connected on Facebook and whatever. And I think, or at least I think we're kind of fans of each other now, because I sent him my articles and whatnot, and he was super kind enough to send me his book on the Wendigo, which just came out recently. And I can't say enough about him. He's a really genuine person, and his work is fantastic. So it's now I can just, you know, I razz on him ever since. So
well, so do I, but I owe him, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I met Chad Lewis and Kevin Nelson a few years ago at the Van Meter Visitor Festival, because I had read their book that they wrote with Noah Voss. And for those that don't know, the Van Meter Visitor was a strange creature, entity, cryptid, that was seen in 1903 in Van Meter, Iowa, which is just west of Des Moines. And they have this great festival, which I understand that you are going to do your best to attend this year.
That is my hope,
you know,
depending on what's going on between the Canada and U.S. borders. But I'm hoping to get down, because I really love the people that are involved in that community. It's just a very different, and I find a more open community even than sort of the parapsychology one. So, I'm hoping to, get down and actually, hang out with some of you awesome people. And, so many of you guys I know just even through, of course, professional connections and stuff like that, but have actually never been in the same room with any of you. So
well,
hopefully we're going to change this.
That will be a blast, and you'll get to take the walking tour that Chad Lewis gives you, where he takes you through expansive downtown Van Meter and talks about the week of terror, where the strange, almost sort of a pterodactyl-like creature showed up, which had very strange properties as well. But I have to tell you that Zelia Edgar, who is sometimes my co-host, and she has her own show, Just Another Tinfoil Hat. She was interviewing Chad one time, and they were talking about the 1970s because Zelia is a very young lady, but she would like to step back when they had all those great, UFO magazines on the shelves, which you probably don't remember either. But that was a great time. But Chad Lewis was saying, well, that Steve Ward, he was researching in 1978, 1878. Yeah, okay, thanks, Chad. And then another time he was talking to somebody on the Van Meter page, I think, and he said, Steve Ward was here when the visitor showed up, 1903, right? Okay, so I definitely owe Chad, and I plan to get back to him one day. But let's. I was intrigued by. I've been reading your book, Teaching the Living, and great. It's just a really fun read. Of course, I had to get it on Kindle because I didn't have enough time to get the hard copy, but. I was very intrigued by your beginnings, and it goes back in your family, your great grandfather. Can you tell us something about that? And also it talks about. Well, I'll get to that later. But tell us about the. And you didn't even know about your grandfather, and that he was kind of a Renaissance man, wasn't he?
Very much so. Not only was he a very famous physician in Ontario, but he was a poet. He belonged to the astrological groups there. He was very much into astronomy, very much a scientist, and a brilliant mind, brilliant guy. His poetry is very similar, if anybody out there is familiar with Walt Whitman, very similar in tone and cadence to Walt Whitman. I mean, he was so good at what he did, but he was mainly noticed for his and known for his influence in the medical community. Very much a skeptic, really wasn't leaning towards the paranormal in one way or the other. And he ended up loaning his house out to a group of friends, his living room, because they wanted to do these sittings with a guy that they had come across by the name of Louis Benjamin. And Louis Benjamin was rather an uneducated fellow. I think he had like a grade 6 education. He was just a very simple guy, but he had this ability to channel. And the people around him were absolutely convinced that this was real. And my great grandfather, he thought they were all nuts, but he was kind enough to let them use his living room. And after a little while, he started, peeking in on what was going on and listening and whatnot. And the more he heard, the more it struck him as something that was really unique. And he started sitting in on these sittings that were going on. And what he discovered was that Louis Benjamin was channeling this group that they called themselves the Humble Ones, like a grand consciousness, basically a collective of entities, and everyone from Ralph Waldo Emerson, I believe Walt Whitman was actually in there, all sorts of names that most people would definitely identify with. And the stuff that was coming out of Louis Benjamin blew my great-great-grandfather's mind, because this guy had no clue, no education. His cadence changed. The advice that was coming from him was it was beyond that time period by far. And he was introduced to this side of the paranormal that was joyful and happy. And these entities taught the group, how to find their joy, how to meditate, how to connect with loved ones that had passed over. I mean, the advice was amazing and part and parcel to things that we would hear today.
What year was that about?
This was the early 1900s.
Okay.
So this was a time period where this stuff was it was hitting the point where scientists and whatnot were looking at this and going, oh, it's all crap. It's all bunk. This is ridiculous. It wasn't cool anymore to be involved with this stuff. So my great-great-grandfather was really putting himself on the line. He ended up writing 2 books of just transcriptions of these sittings. And he put them out there basically with a foreword and said, look, you guys can take it or leave it. I think what we experienced here was real. Here it is. And he got slammed for this stuff. He just about lost his career in medicine because they all thought he was nuts. But you read the books today and you swear to God that they had been written 2 years ago. Where they were coming from was amazing.
Well, I become very intrigued by them. It was the 20th plane, right?
Right.
And birth through death. And yeah, I didn't know who this Louis Benjamin was. I didn't realize that he was a man of not a man of letters. And it's interesting that excuse me, what was the name of the group again that they channeled
The humble
the Hubble
ones.
ones? Okay,
Yeah.
that's really. I've always been fascinated by channeling, and of course we have the law of one, with the
Yeah.
raw materials, and that is R.A., Don Elkins, and oh, come on, Carla Ruckert. And that's sort of I guess that was kind of the same thing, wasn't it? The sort of a group consciousness, I think. But
Yeah.
back but you're right. This is sort of like ahead of its time. I don't, well, they didn't call it channeling back then either. They probably called it something very different. But do you see any parallels? I guess you see some parallels with what they were doing then with some of the things that have become more accepted today.
Yeah, like I think probably the closest that I've found would be Esther Hicks and the Abraham Hicks material, as well as Seth with Jane Roberts,
Okay.
and the very, very, very similar, and the just the level of insight that's provided, the level of advice and insight and what I find very interesting about it is them describing how certain things work and whatnot. Of course, at the time, everybody sort of threw it away and said this is junk. And now we've had a turn, even just in the last number of years, in parapsychology and quantum physics, where they're beginning to not only find basis for exactly what they've been told and what we've been receiving over the years from these groups, but they're finding heavy, heavy scientific evidence that this is how the universe works. And there was a book released very recently called called Advancements in Parapsychological Research, the 10th edition, and it was probably one of the most impactful books over the last 10 years that I've ever read, and it really deals with that quantum and neuroscience side of how this phenomenon happens, and damned if they're not spot on. And I mean, and these are new discoveries that are coming out, so I think we have to lend some credence as to what's happening.
Well, I've become very intrigued by these books. I've actually ordered them on Amazon because they are available in reprint editions. Probably, in fact, some of the editions where they just copy the old book and so forth. But those are great. Now, like you said, this was an area. Now, just prior to this was the time of spiritualism and theosophy and the Fox sisters and the New Thought movement. So I guess you were saying that about 1900, a lot of this was waning, and some of the fascination with spiritualism was going away, and so it was harder for your great grandfather to pursue this.
Yeah, Canada, especially Canada, is really tricky because here we had in the late 1800s, you had the Society of Psychical Research that was formed, and they actually designed themselves to not only simply prove paranormal phenomenon, but mainly to debunk hoaxers. So as we move into the early 1900s, you've got this era where people are beginning to realize that, oh yeah, no, there are fake psychics and there are fake sitters and there are fake this. So, you get into the scientific and the medical community, and they're going, oh, this is all crap. So even though there was a lot of research that was going on that was absolutely, valid and solid and whatnot, the public opinion was kind of shifting. It was starting to make that transition. And, in order to come out, and even today, coming out as a physician or a medical doctor or anything like that and saying, no, this is real, you will get hit with a wall of stigma that is still prevalent and a problem. So, I mean, back then he was definitely putting it on the line.
Now, it also seems from your description that the messages were coming through. I mean, the channeling is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, there is some that seems to be legitimate. Sometimes people seem to be a little bit delusional, and sometimes we don't really know what the source is. It doesn't seem like it's all created equal. Some seems to me personally to come from a higher vibration. But now this information seemed like it was. I'm guessing because I haven't read the books yet, but sort of like almost like positive thinking, self-help, self-development. Some of the ideas that were coming through.
Yeah, very much so. And I think getting people to understand the that we are connected to this stuff. Like a huge part of their message was the idea that this isn't something that you need to pay somebody to connect with. We are hardwired for this connection. We're hardwired to be, in tune with non-physical energy, and to be able to find our own joy. And when we find that joy, we're more connected with this energy. And it's, I think what they were trying to get across, and what they were trying to get people to really understand, is just the depth in which we ourselves are hardwired to be able to do this, and what we're able to do with our reality, that we get to create, we get to manifest what's out there. And it's really cool stuff. I mean, they've taken this sort of this bent system that we have on the negative, and said, no, like, you guys have got it wrong. Let us explain how you guys can be as joyful and as happy as possible, and how the paranormal can aid us in doing that.
And your book and your philosophy for reaching out and helping people, you write that it was kind of laid out in this in these sessions before you even knew that they existed. Wasn't it kind of hush hush about your grandfather and your family? You write that there was a lot of negative paranormal experiences in your family, but it put kind of a damper on the whole thing.
Yeah, very much so. I think my family's got a history of depression. My grandmother lost one of her kids when he was very young. They've had a sort of a rough history just in general, and because of that, the activity that they ended up experiencing was not good. Like, my grandmother had some really terrifying experiences, and when I was about 6 years old, my mom and dad and myself, we were visiting them. And she had told my mom remembers this vividly, that, whatever you do, do not let Morgan get involved in anything to do with the paranormal, because it's bad. Like, it's all bad. It's dangerous. Don't do that, because her experiences were awful. So there's that side of the family. And then my mom's side of the family, they weren't necessarily, which is the side my great grandfather came from. As far as I knew, they hadn't had any experiences at all. They had completely shut the door on anything A.D. Watson had done. So it wasn't until much later, after my grandfather actually passed away, that there was a bunch of stuff that was found on Albert Durant Watson that he had, and I guess other people in the family had. But it was really interesting. They had absolutely shut that out completely. So I never knew about it until 6 years into my work with Entityseeker.
Wow. What was it like discovering those papers of your great grandfather?
Oh boy, it blew my mind, because not only, like you said before, he was he was the first to begin this work really in Canada on a serious level. But the content of the messages, I ordered his, the two books that he put together immediately. And when I sat down to read them, I felt like I was reading something that I would have put together. Like, there was stuff in there that was it was completely on the same page as to what I was talking about and researching. So it just felt like this was no accident. I mean, there are no accidents, but this was really no accident.
No,
And
this
it just
really
felt like
couldn't
a
have been.
calling. Yeah. No, no, I don't think it was either. And it was, I've had so much in my life that has happened, that has come together in a similar manner, where, I've had an instinct about something, or a passion about something, and it turns out later that this was spot on. And this was just, it really blew my mind. And I knew for a fact that at that point that I was on the path that I should be on.
Before I ask you how your book came about before you discovered this and your teaching, weren't you chased as a young girl by something in the
I
house?
was, yeah. So when I first started to get really interested in the paranormal, was actually after an hour special that I saw decades ago. And I was so fortunate, because the time that I was getting interested in it, we weren't bombarded with ghost hunter shows and this, that, and the other thing. The shows that came on were by people like Linda Moulton Howe. They featured people like Dr. Carrie Gaynor and Lloyd Auerbach and people who are the real deal when it comes to parapsychology. So when I started to get into it, I was about, I'd say 9, and I was fascinated by what I had seen. But we were also living in this little fourplex in BC, in Vancouver, where we had activity that was going on, and my mom was experiencing it, my dad was experiencing it. And so when the one morning, after about a good 6 months of stuff going on in this house, I'd come downstairs, and it was about, I'd say 5 a.m. It was still pitch black out. And the way our kitchen was, you could see if there was a light on, but you couldn't see into the kitchen. So I came down the stairs and I heard somebody in the kitchen and the light was on. And I thought it was my mom or dad that were up. And I said, hello. And the activity in the kitchen just quit. And there was a silence that fell over the house. And I knew immediately it wasn't right. All my gut instinct just kicked in, and I thought somebody had broken into the house. So I was standing there, not sure what to do, terrified, because I am standing there 9 years old or 8 years old or something like that. And I'm listening and waiting, and I hear this person, what I thought was a person, coming out from the kitchen, except what appeared around the corner was this kind of opaque figure, and it rushed at me, scared the heck out of me. I mean, I just lost it. And I went back up the stairs, and I guess halfway back up, my mom and dad got the clue something was wrong as well, because they heard commotion. They came downstairs, and when they turned all the lights on, there was nobody there. I mean, there was no sign of a break-in. There was nothing. And at that point, I think that was the moment where they realized that, you know what, we have to start opening up and talking about paranormal phenomenon, because this is happening. So it broke the ice, I think.
This house had obviously had a history of stuff happening.
It did for us. I mean, we have no idea who lived there prior or anything that had happened prior. But I mean, we had a number of things go on there, like where I had come up the stairs the one day, and I felt like I had literally walked through something, like walked through, I guess, a wall of energy is probably the best way to put it. I know we were hearing footsteps, stuff was going missing. We'd come upstairs in the evening, and you'd see somebody's depression laying on the bed. So there was a lot that was going on that, I think everybody was scratching their heads over, but this really brought it to a head.
My wife has had those kind of experiences or something similar. Not real. Well, she did have a pretty scary one once, but I don't. I'm the guy that doesn't have anything. So we'll have to explore that later. Why some people do. You talk about frequency and so forth, but we'll get into that. So you became, as many did. Now you became fascinated because of experiences and some of these shows. The few shows that were out there that inspired you. So what was it that led you to actually write a book or to start a course that would help people? I mean, you must have realized that there's people out there from your own family that are dealing with some very scary situations when they have, in quotes, haunted house or poltergeist phenomena or whatever. So what was it that drove you to take this path?
Well, it was funny actually, because early on, my very dear friend of mine, Stephanie Wirtz, who ended up co-founding Entityseeker with me, she and we'd literally been to school together. I mean, it was crazy, best of friends, and she and I spent most of our younger years delving into this and trying to understand it. So, I mean, we were the kids that never went to the school dances. We didn't go to prom. We literally, this is what we explored. And the more we researched, the more we uncovered, the more we read, the more we were seeing patterns again and again and again in cases of both the negative and the positive. And we began to see such a strong correlation between what was going on with the people and what was going on with the activity in the space and so on and so forth. And we started to realize that nobody had really seemed to make that connection. So when we formed Entityseeker, that was really what our driving force was. We wanted to create something that was going to be a resource for people in a new way to understand not only what was going on, but understand themselves. And from that point on, we realized that, we could be showing people and at least presenting our findings to the everyday person. So we began with workshops. Stephanie and I, we started doing workshops all over the city, wherever we could go, whoever would listen. And they started to sell out very quickly. People were really gravitating towards what we had. And it wasn't long after that we started to get it picked up by shows, also very, very interested. And after our first show on Discovery Channel, which was a haunting, we ended up, or I ended up getting picked for a number of university college courses here in Edmonton, and I started teaching the program in correspondence with their psychology and social work program. So I think because it was so universal, it was just starting to grab people on another level. And the book actually didn't come until years later. People were bugging me. They're like, "Why don't you just write a book on it?" And finally, I had the time to actually sit down and put it on paper. But so it was a long journey. But Steph and I, we really cut our teeth in the early years, and really the driving force was to just get the information to people so that they could hear this in a new way.
I took sort of a similar path, only in that you guys focused on, you saw that there were patterns. There were things that were showing up in different cases. Well, the researchers that have really influenced me are John Keel and Jacques Vallée. And John Keel early on saw that there were patterns which connected all kinds of things, UFOs, poltergeist phenomena, etc. Has your research expanded to look at, in other words, do some of the people that experience these things, are they also experiencing UFO phenomena or classic abduction phenomena or other aspects, what we think of as other aspects of the paranormal?
I haven't run into any client cases where there's been a crossover. I know, like, of course, John Keel's work and whatnot, where they definitely had people that seem to be experiencing both things. But I've tried to stick to the parapsychology side when it comes to things like precognition, ESP, and stuff like that. And mainly what my concern is with why is it that people experience, they can experience a rash of things. And usually it's within the same context. Like the people that are experiencing a rash of paranormal activity that's negative, the odds are all of it's negative. Like they don't have just one or two or three things and then maybe a bundle of positive things. They usually have a rash of negative stuff going on, and vice versa. So my real concern, I guess, my study really began to focus on less about the phenomenon itself and more about what is going on with the individual, that seems to be almost creating this theme of events going on in their life with this certain emotional content to it.
That's what I won't dwell on this too much. But Keel had a catchphrase where he said, "Ask the experiencer what they had for breakfast." What he meant was find out all about them, and he would find out that somebody that saw a light in the sky was experiencing paranormal phenomena, strange electrical phenomena, strange visitors, strange phone calls, that sort of thing. And Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who I'm sure you're familiar with her work.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we lost her a couple of years ago. I saw her speak at a Mothman festival once, and she had been studying reports of shadow people, shadow entities people see often in their bedrooms, but not necessarily there. She discovered that a significant portion of them were also experiencing classic, in quotes, alien abduction phenomena. And also John Keel and other researchers that investigated the Mothman. I'm a visitor of the Mothman Festival, which you'll have to come to someday, which is an absolute blast. But he found that people that saw this creature, which is more of an apparition than flesh and blood creature, would experience outbreaks of poltergeist phenomena when they got home. Now, he did not do what you're doing. which we need to look at, is while he found out all about the individual and what they were, all the things they were experiencing, he didn't really get into the the emotional aspect, what you have, what you talk about, frequency and emotions. And could you pursue some of that? Maybe give us some of the examples of what your findings were with Stephanie.
Definitely. It was so interesting because when we began to really take a deep dive into these people's experiences, we noticed that the phenomenon that was going on around them, it was very much reflective of their emotional state or the unhealed stuff that they had going on in their experience. And a lot of people kind of jumped to the conclusion that we were trying to say that, oh, this was all in their head, and that's completely, not true at all. What we've discovered is that when we've got unhealed, or we're sitting on the negative end of that emotional center and that emotional spectrum, the activity and the things that we start to bring into our experience, the things that start to manifest in our experience, are a direct relation and a direct correlation and mirror of what we've got going on that we're not dealing with. And vice versa, we get the other side of it, where if people are having a pretty good life, they're feeling passionate in their experience, they're pursuing what they want, the stuff that ends up showing up and connecting for them is phenomenal. I mean, it's amazing. It's the stuff that we want going on in our experience. It's the connections with the loved ones who have passed over. It's all this cool stuff. And the people who are sitting kind of on that other end of that emotional spectrum are really dialed in to sort of the negative side of this phenomenon. A case example that I like to give often was a young woman from Ontario that I was dealing with, and she had phoned in a desperate situation. She had a young son who was about 2 years old at the time. Her husband, who a really good guy and whatnot, they had a pretty good, happy family. And they were struggling with an entity that was just absolutely hell-bent over the son's room. Very, very protective, very territorial, and it would beat the crap out of this mother who it didn't like at all. They were constantly at odds. And interestingly enough, it had respect for the husband. And even though needless to say, didn't get along with him, there was no violence. There was, it would listen to him. There was no real issue. And when we started to really dig into this, what we discovered was that even though what she had going on currently was pretty good, she had a pretty happy life, she had, prior to this, left a really abusive relationship. Both she and her son had escaped. She had been beaten on, and I mean, the guy was horrible. And what was interesting was that after she had gotten out of that, there was nothing done to do the emotional work to clean any of that up. And as she moved into this new relationship with this really awesome dude, she still had all these open wounds. And when we have these open wounds, we bleed, and we'll bleed into every area of our life. And what ends up happening, or what seems to end up happening, is that, just like some people will attract another abusive person, or they'll attract a boss who's abusive, or they'll attract something else. In this case, she attracted an entity that was literally mirroring exactly what was going on with her. And so her job, her work, was to clean that up. She had to get into counseling. She had to start to clean this up. And as soon as she started to do that, then all of a sudden, boom, we started to see a relief in the phenomenon that was going on. And so it really came down to, what is it? What do we have that's going on that is recreating these experiences? What is it reflective of? And it's using that formula, you could really start to understand over and over again why people, say, for example, who are moving from house to house to house to house and seem to have the same thing going on over and over again, are having the same thing going on over again, because they're moving themselves. There's nothing going on with that point of attraction.
That's really interesting, because if you look back at the New Thought movement, which has kind of laid the groundwork for some of the positive thinking movement later, like with Norman Vincent Peale and up to Wayne Dyer. It's the same kind of that's what they talk about. They talk about getting sort of self-awareness and cleaning up all that stuff, and then it changes your life. So it sounds like it's just very much the same thing. But I have to ask, why is it that some people that have horrible internal issues attract this kind of phenomena, and others that have equally as bad issues don't?
Well, and I think there's a number of factors that go into that. One of the discoveries that the parapsychology community is making, just on a deeper level now, is exactly what is that? What is creating that? They're finding a connection with our neurology that might have something to do with that. Looking at almost like these kind of epileptic type brain waves that people are experiencing, that, I mean, you and I could have and we'd never know. But they're starting to tie in a lot of neuroscience into why some people are having these experiences versus others. But it also depends too, I think a lot on our own point of attraction, our own state of expectation. People who tend to be more open to the idea of paranormal phenomenon will likely have a higher chance of experiencing it. So I think there's a number of factors that go on, but just in the same way that, somebody, might go into the world and attract another abusive lover, they might go into the next person might go into the world and, just end up in a terrible job, and might never see another abusive lover. So I think our points of attraction are different. I think, as I say, neuroscience has a chunk to do with it, but it's a multitude of varying factors.
Yeah, Keel hypothesized it was sort of a literary device, the super spectrum, and he felt that certain people were naturally more psychic than others, and those were the ones that tended more to see cryptids or UFOs or whatever, and those individuals were prone to seeing something more than once. I mean, they might see several UFOs, or they might see a Bigfoot and a UFO at different time periods. Um, so I wonder. If that's the case, then I'm reaching for my next question here, which I had, and it was brilliant, and it just evaporated. But that's okay. So what kind of techniques then? Then when you're teaching this course, and just kind of basically, you got somebody that's in a horrible state. What kind of things do you talk to them about? How do you kind of work them through the episode?
Well, the first thing that I think people have to understand is that we really do have a say in what's happening to us. I think hauntings are probably one of the only segments in our world where, we believe that it's completely asserted on us and that we have no responsibility for. If we're in a bad job with a bad boss, immediately you tell the person, "Oh my God, that's horrible. Hey, you need to quit." If the person keeps going back over and over and over again, you start to wonder what's going on. So I think, for most situations, we kind of look at it and go, okay, well, we have an opportunity to do something about it. And this is one of those same situations where we have to start to relook at hauntings and things like that and go, okay, hold on a minute. I've got a role here too. What is going on with me that this is an indicator of? So one of the things that I get people to do is do a lot of journaling. I think journaling is so powerful because we can take our experiences, we can take our our story and our verbiage about ourselves that's normally all in our head, and get it on paper. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually have clients write down their story. Tell me your story. What is your story? Because when you read that story back, or when you have the person read that story back, you can get a really clear glimpse as to what it is that they're telling themselves about what's going on. And our narrative is crucially important. Are you telling your history and all you've highlighted is the negatives and you believe you're a victim? Or are you telling about all your amazing, wonderful experiences and you've got a handle on the negative stuff that has gone on? So I really encourage people to start to nitpick as to how they're framing their world. So that's the first part. And then being able to go into these places, of course, debunk as much as we can. Sometimes it's just, plain old pipes rattling.
Right.
So that's always important too. But at the end of the day, whether it's pipes or whether it's paranormal or whatever, it really does come down to figuring out, okay, What is your role? What is your experience in what's going on? What have you not cleaned up that needs to be dealt with? And within usually about the first half hour of talking to somebody, you can usually pick it out. You can find it, or they look at you and go, "Oh my God, I just figured this out," and they'll have their own aha moment about it and figure it out. So it's kind of cool. So that's the beginning, anyway.
Anne Druffel wrote a fascinating book called How to Defend Yourself Against UFO Abduction, which sounds like a satire, but it's not. And she gives several, she discovered in one of the cases that she had been investigating, she found that the people were able to disengage the situation by using certain techniques, and she covered different ones. Sometimes people would stand very strong on their religion. In some cases, it was taking charge and expressing righteous indignation that they're being violated. It just sounds like there's a little bit of a parallel there, where the people you're dealing with have to at some point maybe even get angry and take charge of their situation.
Yeah, I think, I think taking charge is really what the bottom line is to be able to own what's going on and to turn around and say, okay, look, like, this is happening. I'm not going to brush it under the rug anymore. I'm not going to brush what my feelings are under the rug anymore. And to learn the ability to really want to take back your life. I think that's probably one of the most common things that I run into with a lot of people, is the fact that, as much as they hate what's going on, they would rather deal with what's going on than deal with the underlying cause of the stuff happening. And when you get people like that, they're simply just not ready. They're not ready, and they will fight you to hang on to the pain, to hang on to their problems, because it's easier to deal with the entity than it is to deal with the underlying root of what's happening with them. So, I mean, being able to stand up, being ready to do that work, to do that healing work, and to know it's not going to be pretty. The entity often will buck you because you've done a pretty good job of teaching them that what they're doing is okay. So you got that issue on top of it, but it is really that is the core of where it starts. Own your stuff, own your story, and then you can start to deal with this stuff from a place of empowerment rather than from a place of fear or anger or frustration, because that's just going to run you into a hole.
Do you see any parallels at all with 10-step programs?
I think so. I think probably one of the biggest that I can't say enough about it is the idea of surrender, the ability to be able to own what you've got going and let go, and trust the process. Trust that faith, trust the process. We have a very conscious universe around us, and it will help. That universe will aid you. It will help. We live in an abundant universe, but I think people have to ask the question: do you believe we live in a friendly universe or not? And if your answer is no, you're gonna have a problem. There's a fundamental structure there that you're gonna really need to lean on, that you're missing. So I think that's probably one of the number one things.
Let me do my station identification here. Just be a moment. You are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I am Steve Ward, and today I'm talking with Morgan Knudsen, and we are talking about her life and encounters with the unknown and with the known. I want to get back to your book and your course and so forth, but I have to ask you. You have kind of a special relationship with fire.
I do, and it's talking about surrender and and finding that Zen moment. Fire is my Zen moment. I've been a firebender for about 6-7 years now, and I practice with staff and fire eating and levy wand and fire breathing and all sorts of things.
Wow. So what is fire bending sort of a term for the whole thing, or is it something separate from fire breathing?
I think it's sort of a term for the whole thing.
Okay.
I've been involved in performance and stuff like that for a long time, my whole life, and getting into fire was such a massive lesson, which is now why I use it in teaching with the paranormal also, because there was so many parallels to this, this energy that you're mastering, that is powerful. It can be dangerous, but we're taught all our lives with fire that you don't touch it. It's too hot. It's destructive. It's bad. Yada yada yada. And what I discovered in working with fire, being able to manhandle it basically, is that, what, there's a gray area here. And, using science, using an understanding of thermodynamics and fuels and all sorts of things, I can pick it up with my bare hands and be okay. And what I realized was that, it really does parallel what we're taught about the paranormal, that it's bad, it's negative, you don't touch it, you don't get involved in it. But, hang on a minute. If you can break that paradigm down, you start to realize that that's just simply not true. Can there be danger in it? Of course there can. But, we have to understand that there's this gray area. So now I often use fire in my lectures and in my shows to demonstrate the fact that, yeah, you know what? Some of what you were taught when you were a kid is true. But we've evolved from that. And it's not all that way. And if you can break down somebody's paradigm around something like fire, at that point, they kind of have to listen to you about the rest of it.
Is there any parallel with walking on hot coals?
Yeah, I think a little bit. But, again, you're using the laws of thermodynamics, the laws
Right.
of physics, to make that happen. So yeah, I mean, and it really becomes a mind over matter thing. I use the example in my book of a trick called a palm extinguish. And essentially what it is you've got your fire eating torch in your hand, which is about, 2 inches of burning Kevlar. And
Yes.
the idea is that you grab the end of this thing with bare hand, and put it out. And you wrap your whole hand around it and you put this thing out. And it is such a mind freak because everything in your body is going like, you don't grab this burning piece of hot Kevlar, like you're crazy. But if you do it with the right fuel, you do it at the right time, and you do it with the right hand motion, you feel like you're putting your hand in lukewarm water. So it's, it's very different. And it's, so again, mind over matter, and being able to understand that it's like, no, there's a loophole.
Do you have any performances on YouTube? Anything we can watch?
I do, yeah. Anybody can go to snakeandpire.com, and there's all of my better videos anyway are
Well,
there.
where can we find the bad videos, Morgan? That's what I want to know.
Nowhere.
Just kidding. Okay. Oh, that's good. All right.
but we have a lot of fun, and I think it just goes to show, that we, you can find something really unique, make a passion out of it, but learn from it. When I'm feeling disconnected, or I'm feeling upset or anything like that, I never ever at that point go and pick up the fire, because I know for a fact that something's going to happen. The fire will tell you when you're out of connection, and it'll bite you. It'll, whatever. It'll tell you when you're out of connection, and it's sort of the same thing with the paranormal.
Well, that sounds fascinating. That everybody should go and check that out, including me. Uh, let's go back to the one question I have is, you're dealing with something. I mean, something that's real. People aren't imagining things. There's some kind of entity or force. Are we dealing with demons, spirits, thought forms? I mean, some people think that these are tulpas, monsters from the id, so to speak. When you hear terms like ultra-terrestrial, elemental, and so forth, do you have any sense of, or have any idea what? I know people have certain issues. They sort of set off a vibe or a frequency, and they pull some of this into their experience. But do you know what they are in reality?
I think, I think it sort of falls into a number of different categories, because you can have situations where you clearly know that it's, somebody who has passed over, and you're having a wonderful interaction with somebody who, used to know. And then, you've got another sort of vast phenomenon, which seems to be just a replay of events that happen over and over, and you get apparitions with that. And they're not conscious. It's just an image. And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, like we were talking about, this kind of negative being that definitely isn't people. Like they behave very differently. I spent a good 17 years of my career looking at their behavior and their patterns. And they tend to be very animalistic. They come up in places where there's been a lot of negative focused thought, and they seem to be birthed from that focus, which I've always found really intriguing, because they are always a direct reflection of either the events that have gone on in the space, or of course of that person's particular focus. So my understanding and what I've come to believe about them is the fact that they are the thought that has become the thinker, and they seem to be completely apart from anything else. And in the Gateway Project, during the CIA's research into a lot of this stuff with the Monroe Institute, they came across the same decision. They felt it was that as well, that it had to do with negative focused thought, that these were thought forms that had become conscious. And that seems to be essentially what it is, at least from my own research.
That's interesting. Paul Eno. Well, I don't think he actually thinks of them as thought forms. He calls them parasites, but he seems to call them something, a separate entity or whatever. But that's really fascinating, because that is sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Forbidden Planet.
Yes.
Yes. The theme was that the Krell race had destroyed themselves. They had created this device that could create thought forms, but they forgot about their dark inside, the monsters from the id. That's kind of what you're talking about. It's the I don't know, the darker part of human nature manifesting as a thought form.
Yeah, I think, when we plug our attention into something, I think we don't realize exactly how powerful that is. There was an experiment done in Ontario here back in the 70s called the Philip experiment, and
Yes.
where they actually proved this, and for those who don't know it that are listening, it was this concept that was created by the Society of Psychical Research in Canada and Mensa, where they put together a group of people who wrote a backstory about a person that they named Philip. And the person didn't exist, and they practiced sort of these old Victorian seance sessions to try to see if they could actually manifest something out of nothing. And when they added joy to their concept and their creation, because that's what they'd been missing for about a year, they realized that they were missing the fun. And when they plugged in the factor of joy and fun, they ended up creating this entity that was physically responsive. It was answering questions. It would move furniture. It would do all sorts of things, and responded to the name Philip. And of course, Philip was just a figment of what they had written down. They replayed that experiment again with another group that created another conscious form called Lilith, and they repeated it again, and with again the same results. So, I mean, they know at this point that you can focus something into reality. But I think the key is people really need to realize that, like, this happens like this happens a lot.
Well, I didn't. I mean, I knew about the Philip experiment and that they created a sort of a fake historical figure, but I had no idea that they added joy to it, positive thought, and that's what triggered the manifestation.
Yeah, they couldn't get it to work for about a year. They worked their butts off on this thing and couldn't figure it out. And they would come together and they would all be super stoic and zen and whatnot. And they would sit down and they would, concentrate and whatever. And it just, like, time after time after time, again, nothing was happening. And the factor that they were missing, when they realized, they looked back on a lot of these old Victorian seances, what they realized was that people were there and they were laughing and they were joking and they were having fun. And they realized, man, we're not having fun at all. So they changed it up, and within about 48 hours of that, they started to have results.
I'll be darned. Now let's take this to go back to channeling. Now, your view of channeling is some channeling, some of the entities that come through. Are some of those the same thing, only a positive or negative? Usually positive, it seems. Are there many different sources, do you think, for channeling? Do people that have died, do they actually do come back and talk to people? So is there a variation on these contacts?
Oh, I think there are. I mean, you look back and throughout readings and history and whatnot, and I think I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. But I do think, you have these situations where, if you're in that negative state and you're working towards something like this, then what you're going to get is probably not going to be very fun. But the people that really understand that it's about letting go and about letting their emotions, letting their vibration raise to something that's happy, you're going to tune into something that's happy. You're going to tune into something that is pure positive energy. So, and it comes in various forms. I think some people, have encounters with people they love. Some people, it's, like Esther Hicks, for example, it's a whole new is a whole new group that wants to chat. So it seems to vary from person to person, but the connection, I think for the most part, you always get the frauds, of course, but I think a lot of them are very genuine.
I think some of them, and I just want to see what you think about it, are possibly, I mean, that something's really coming through, but there's not a lot of information there. But back in the 50s and 60s, when they were channeling the Space Brothers, George Van Tassel, George Hunt Williamson, and so forth, they would get a lot of the same names, and even
Yeah.
the Carla Ruckart and Don Elkins that channeled Ra, they got some of the same names, and but some of the information, at least with the Space Brothers, was we're orbiting Earth in the whatever, and well, actually, they would say sometimes they'd say, well, can we see you? And they'd say, well, if you step outside and look to the west, and they would see a light in the sky. So I'm not sure what was going on there, but the name Ashtar keeps popping up. I mean, who hasn't channeled Ashtar? I mean, I should be channeling Ashtar, but so, but that being said, sometimes, and these may not be legitimate, sometimes there were themes that would show up, like the planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter was called Maldek, and it was destroyed somehow. And the other themes were that the good aliens came from the Pleiades, bad ones came from the Orion belt. So have you ever looked into some of the I mean, channeling is such a vast subject, and I find it really fascinating, but some of it seems to be valuable. Some of it, like the Course in Miracles, is one
Yeah.
that seems to come through at a very high vibration wherever that came through.
Yeah.
You're familiar with that, of course.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think there's I think there's some that's coming through as useful, and some that not. And I think sometimes what ends up happening is that people are tapping into to thought, right? Like every thought that's ever been thought is still in existence, because energy cannot be created or destroyed, and thoughts are electrical signals. And so I think we have this sort of vast consciousness that exists that we can tune into or tap into and whatnot, and then tap into it in the same way that we tap into something that was conscious. Now, one thing that's really come out in the last number of years about things like channeling or readings or anything like that people are or parapsychologists are finding very interesting is the fact that much of this, it actually has more to do with telepathy than it actually does tuning into something else. And what they've discovered is the fact that a lot of these people, even these some of these psychics that seem to be very accurate in what they're pulling out, are actually pulling remnants of the person in front of them, rather than something that's unconscious or subconscious or consciousness outside of themselves. So that's been a pretty heavy revelation as well. So I question whether some of this stuff is actually a form of telepathy over and above channeling.
Um, the Yes. So yeah, I'm just trying to deal with what some of the sources are, and I guess some of it might just be. I mean, if the universal mind, if the collective unconscious is similar to our consciousness, there are, I guess, lower and lower levels of just nothing. I mean, just good gobbledygook. Just the way stuff floats through our minds sometimes. Perhaps that's what happens with this collective unconscious, and then maybe sometimes that comes through. I think of the book called Oahspe that was channeled by John Battle Newborough back in the 1800s, and I can't make heads or tails of that. That might be something to usher in the new age, but man, I sure can't find it. But I want to move a little bit into cryptids because you can really ask the same thing about some of these experiences. Um, there's quite a division in the Bigfoot community and in other cryptid communities where some people believe that we're dealing with flesh and blood creatures that have remained hidden. Others look at I see that there is some many paranormal aspects to some of these things. I know you have done some research into cryptids. Let me ask you this: what was uh, the first thing that happened that where you started to investigate cryptids? I mean, so for some people, it's Boggy Creek, and some people it was the Patterson Gimlin film. What spurred your interest in cryptids?
Oh my gosh, it's funny because I think early on I've always been interested in bizarre animals, just really unique creatures. I remember when I was a kid finding a book on sharks and discovering the goblin shark, and I thought it was the most unbelievable thing I'd ever seen. And of course, they were very, very rare, still very rare, but just most bizarre looking shark you'd ever come across. And so I think I've always had that real deep interest into animals. I love animals. I've got a snake at home who's just I adore him. But I've always been interested in really unique creatures, and so I think it was natural for me to come into the realm of cryptozoology, especially when you realize so many animals that we now have today were originally cryptids, like gorillas and the coelacanth and all these different creatures. So for me, the idea that we have this undiscovered side of the planet with these amazing creatures like Sasquatch and whatnot. To me, it's just the coolest thing. I remember seeing the Legend of Boggy Creek when I was a kid, and I just couldn't believe it. I thought this was the neatest thing. I thought at the time, because I was quite young, that it was all fiction. And when I found out that was real, or was based on a true story, I just flipped right out. I thought it was just so awesome.
Some people see some of these things as thought forms also. There seems to me to be quite a division. You look at some of the reports in the Northwest and so forth, with footprints and hair samples and so forth, and very, very much looking fresh flesh and blood creatures. You look at the research of Stan Gordon in Pennsylvania in 73 and 74, where people were actually shooting these things and disappearing in a hail of sparks and seeing them in conjunction with UFOs sometimes. And even some of the researchers like Ron Moorhead, who started out
Yeah.
thinking these things were purely flesh and blood, it ended up writing a book called Quantum Bigfoot because he was experiencing things where cameras, their batteries would run down. He'd see strange lights in the sky. He'd find footprints that just ended in the middle of nowhere. Uh, so, have you? I know you've done some research into the Wendigo, and it seems to me that the Wendigo may not actually be a flesh and blood creature from your research.
Yeah, definitely. And I live actually about 20 minutes from probably one of the most famous Wendigo sightings and occurrences, which was Swift Runner, in the about 1896. And I live literally about 20-minute drive from where he was attacked by the Wendigo when he went to the St. Albert Mission in Alberta. And so Alberta is a hot spot for Wendigo sightings and discussion and whatnot. A very dear friend of mine who now works with me, Matt, he had a number of encounters when he was a kid with what he feels was Wendigo. It was something that, I mean, he will never ever forget. I mean, it was absolutely terrifying. I documented in my book, Teaching the Living. And he was experiencing something that he couldn't explain. And so I think the Wendigo definitely falls into that category in the same way that the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogmen is now falling into that category also. Where people have for years, they've been picking up tracks of the Beast of Bray Road and whatnot. They've photographed tracks and hair and this, that, and the other thing, but yet when you go to photograph it, the thing is missed. So, I mean, you've got this really bizarre kind of crossover. And I think, especially in the case of the Wendigo and whatnot, when we take a really heavy look into native stories and native lore, you find some of the answers there. like the Beast of Bray Road and whatnot is really no mystery to a lot of the First Nations people, in the same way that the Wendigo is not a mystery. It just exists.
Well, I know that Linda Godfrey discovered by happenstance that she was looking at clusters of dogman sightings in southern Wisconsin. And she noticed that from a book on Wisconsin mounds that they were
Yes.
clustering around certain specific mounds, the panther mounds and the water spirit mounds. And that just goes back to Native American lore as well. Is it safe to say that, I mean, some people will say that the Wendigo is simply a misidentified Bigfoot?
No, and I don't think so at all. The descriptions are very different. And depending on which culture you talk with, the descriptions will vary. Here in Alberta, you talk with a lot of the people here, and they'll tell you that it is almost werewolf-like. So huge, long, thin, spindly arms with a dog wolf type head, pointed ears, still a mess, looking like it's starved half to death, but patchy, rough fur, very, very werewolf like. Where if you go a little bit east here, you'll hear about them being short, very, very long, scraggly hair with kind of like claw, almost pig-like clawed feet, very creepy. And then you go east and you've got these things that are almost Slenderman-like, these great big long tall spindly, white faces with large eyes. So completely different again. So I don't think that it's necessarily the same, but you can definitely see where these cultures kind of parallel. The one thing that they all say is the fact that they're all very emaciated, very, very thin, and really terrifying. The look that people know in the general population with the antlers and the deer head actually came from a book by Algernon Blackwood, who wrote a fictional story, and they sort of pulled the description not long after the Blackwood book came out.
And we talked about that off air. The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood is a absolute classic in horror. And I remember reading that up in northern Michigan, not quite far enough north to encounter the Wendigo, I don't think. I was reading it on an island between the upper and lower peninsula of Michigan, which is creepy enough at night. But yeah, that's just and it's at the very least a novelette. It's not a short story, and it's really, really just absolutely superb, and you can find that in various horror collections. In your book, you give some lengthy experiences that people have had wrestling with some of this, and I noticed you talked about in one they were dealing with something like the black shuck, that the black spectral dog that comes out of, I think, British folklore. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of seems to be a bit of a crossover. I think where the difference is the fact that the behaviors don't come with it. So for example, the Wendigo here, you've got something that is possessing its victims, sometimes turning someone into another Wendigo, a mirror copy of itself, almost like a zombie effect. When you see this thing, then you're in trouble because you're a target. There's been cultures that have literally locked themselves in their home and starved to death in their house for fear of seeing one.
But
So
that's
I think,
interesting
yeah,
because
go ahead.
the story, the Native American that's guiding them, Defago, he hears his name called in the wind, and he knows his
Yeah.
number's up. And also, Algernon Blackwood must have really researched this, because there's a scene where the hero is tracking the Wendigo and Defago, and he sees the tracks changing as if Defago is changing into this thing. So I thought this was pure fiction, and maybe it is pure fiction, but he based it on a Native American folklore, which makes it even more intriguing.
Totally. And I think he did do his research, because the things that he brings up and he talks about very, very, very similar. He really nails it. And when you get talking with with many of the First Nations people, especially up north here in Alberta. Their hesitancy of talking about it is extreme. I mean, they don't want to bring this thing up. It's absolutely 100% real for them. And in my experience, there is truth to what's happening here. There's been elements in murders and autopsies and whatnot that the professionals still cannot understand. They tried to label it for many years as Wendigo psychosis, but yet there doesn't seem to be really a basis for that either. And we still see case after case after case coming up of these really weird incidents where people are turning to cannibalism, eating other people, and claiming not only that they're getting attacked by this Wendigo, but having these weird physical symptoms. That even Blackwood described a few of them in his book. The swelling of the hands and feet, this weird rash that seems to show up just on the hands and feet. Really, really bizarre things. And you look back at cases of Wendigo like Swift Runner, and you see the same thing over and over and over and over again. So there's something going on. But as to what it is, I don't think anybody has come close to really understanding it.
Wasn't it supposed to have run so fast on the wind that it burns its feet off? It maybe grows its feet back or something like that?
That was Blackwood's story behind it. It seems like in real life, seems like the people that are being attacked by this thing, it's part of the attack itself. My friend Matt that I was mentioning before, he ended up with those symptoms. He ended up in hospital for quite a while, and they were trying to figure out what in the heck was going on with him. They never did diagnose him, but extremely high fever, the rash, the weird swelling, it was very, very odd.
Wow, that's really bizarre when it hits home, and you read a story or you talk about folklore, but then there are aspects that seem to manifest in one's physical condition. I've been fascinated by the black shuck, and that, of course, is this, like I say, this black spectral dog that haunts the ruins and the moors in England and so forth. I talked to last year. I talked to a UFO abductee, Alan Godfrey, who is in 1980. He had a classic abduction experience, and some of it was even. I don't know if you've read Jacques Vallée, but he points out many of the connections between folklore and modern day UFO experiences. There was some of that, but he's undergoing regressive hypnosis, and he's describing what he's seeing in the craft, and all of a sudden he stops and he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous." It was this large black dog. He was essentially describing what could have been the black shuck in a nuts and bolts UFO. Now, I don't know how to figure that out. I don't know if in your research, if every once in a while you're talking to somebody, you're investigating something, and you find something that just doesn't fit at all.
Oh, always. I mean, there's always a piece that you're kind of wondering what in the heck is going on. Probably one of the prime example of it is the Black Forest in the U.S., where people see these huge lights, these balls of light, and they've been filmed time after time after time, and they're beautiful. I mean, there's absolutely huge balls of light that are orbs, and they drift through the trees. They're just phenomenal. And they've been caught in the house, out of the house. It's like a cabin in the woods that it's centered around, and people end up reporting UFOs and stuff like that there as well. So it makes you wonder, like, how much is connected. Is there a dividing line, and where that is? I mean, I'm not huge and into UFOs, but you can definitely see where they creep in. Where there's been a lot of places where people have said, well, there's a lot of Bigfoot, and then they start to see UFOs. But it makes you wonder. I guess, like, I've always been on the fence a little bit, because I think in the same way that people say, oh, well, these things are often seen around native burial sites. Well, most of North America is a native burial site, unfortunately. Right. And, so it's like, okay, at what point, are we there are just a lot of UFOs, and when you see Bigfoot, and then if you notice the UFO, it's connected. We think it's connected, or whatever. But it's hard to say, I think. But there definitely seems to be a link for some of these things.
Well, Akil wondered in the Mothman prophecies, talking about the mounds. What came first? The strange lights in the sky, and then they built the mounds, or were they some kind of a residue from those people that worshipped in the area and may possibly created them? So it's hard to know. This is a whole other area, but when you get into UFOs, there seems to be John Keel, I think, was on the right track when he talked about a lot of this phenomena being reflective and it sort of being co-created, if you will, by the individual and whatever this unknown force is, which would go a little bit along with some of your research. But there also does seem to be an aspect of the phenomena where there does seem to be others amongst us. There does seem to be a real physicality to some of it. Um, I just wondered, have you ever encountered a book called Phone Calls from the Dead by Scott
Mm.
Rogo and Raymond Bayless?
Oh, definitely. Like and Scott Rogo, who's was an amazing researcher,
Yes.
and he worked with a number of my colleagues.
Oh, really?
Eileen, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Lizette Coley, who runs the Parapsychology Association out of Manhattan, Dr. Cal Cooper in the UK out of Northampton, and Cal actually he authored a book as well. He wrote some of Telephone Calls from the Dead, I believe it was called, and has done amazing research in the Rogo area.
I just revisited the book. The book, I've actually made a few copies for some friends because it's gone to third-party printers, sellers a long time
Yeah,
ago, and you can get one for $800, which is just
sounds about
great.
right. Yeah.
But but I remember buying it when it came out, and I would not in those days I would never have touched a book that was called Phone Calls from the Dead if it hadn't been for Scott Rogo, because I was familiar with he wrote Haunted Universe, The Search for Yesterday about reincarnation.
Yeah.
Just he was just one of the best minds that he balanced true skepticism with a real desire to know and great research. And it's just unfortunate that we lost him so young. But just what a great mind.
Oh, very much so. And like you're saying, this sort of tie-in with the physicality. I think another area that kind of bleeds into, not only Bigfoot but also Yeti. You look at the views of the Sherpa people who are dealing with the Yeti on a pretty regular basis, and they'll tell you that this is, it's one of the spiritual protectors of the mountain. That these mountains are gods. They're looked upon as spirits themselves, and that these Yeti are there to guard and enact justice, in fact, on anybody who disrespects the gods or the mountains or spirituality or anything like that. So, there's that angle of it too, where they really believe that this stuff does have this non-physical component to it. And when you get into these cases like the Dyatlov Pass or anything like that,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild.
And that is a common theme where these so-called cryptids, whether they be real or not, are in these areas where they're believed to be or actually are protectors for whatever it is, like you said, the mountains or the mounds or whatever, or a specific geographic area. Um, are there any areas that we haven't really touched on that you would like to touch on tonight?
Oh gosh, I think for me, it is basically that, as we kind of go into the next phase of life here in this world, because here we've got, things opening back up and things, because we really have been dealing with like that area of non-physical, with the pandemic and everything that's been going on. People have had to face a lot of that non-physical side of life, where here you've got an enemy that you can't see, and and I think I would just encourage people, to start delving into what they want next. How can they open themselves up on that spiritual side of things, to sort of take a deep breath, find their connection, and move forward a little bit more conscious into whatever they want to do. Because I think the one thing that has happened over the last year and a half here, is that people have kind of had two ways to go. We can either become more connected and more in touch with who we are, or more disconnected and more fearful. And I would just say, encouraging people to, to take a hard look at what their narrative is of the current world, and reevaluate and realize that we have a role to play in the phenomenon that occurs around us, and the spiritual side of things.
I know you haven't been able to do any lectures lately, but do you do anything on Zoom or anything like that?
Yeah, I've been doing ever since this started. Actually, I started doing a class called Spiritual Healthcare, and I do it every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Time on Facebook. And I'm hoping to expand that, but all the classes are on my YouTube channel. And it really came about because of that exact thing, where I realized that a lot of the tools that we offer in people in dealing with hauntings and stuff like that really does apply to what we've been all dealing with over the last year, and to keep people centered, give them a place of community to come and chat about the paranormal and spirituality, and give them some tools. And it's just continued since last April, I guess.
So give us, tell us all the places people can contact you if they want to check out your YouTube videos. You're on Facebook, and yes, and spell your last name so people can find you.
Will. So last name is spelled Knudsen, and you can find me at entityseeker.ca. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/entityseeker, and it's everything is on the website. So if people go to the website, you can get to my Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, everything, and it's all there. And all the classes are there as well on the website too. So there's a ton of information. There's a ton of links, tons of video. People can check it out. And there's some of my fire lessons are on there as well, so they can find that too.
I might watch them, but I don't take them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Morgan, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, and I really hope that you'll be able to come to Van Meter, and we can both rip on Chad Lewis in person.
That's the plan. That's the plan. He's hopefully he'll still show up. Now I don't know. I mean, now that he knows that we're going to.
Well, he is kind of timid. He knows that we're both after him. He might just hide.
He might bail. So we might have to just warn everybody that. So I don't know. We'll see.
That's right. Well, again, thank you again. And stand by for just a minute. I'm going to do my little closeout here. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit after the show.
Sounds great.
The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer, and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I want to thank our fearless leaders here at the network, Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson. I also want to thank Andy Mercer, my regular co-host, and the producer of the show, and Brian Zeller, who composed the original music for the High Strangeness Factor. I can also be heard on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files as a correspondent every week on this same and other networks. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Thank you for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.